Hey everybody, welcome back to another reasonable price prediction, the series where we try to figure out where your favorite altcoins could be headed. Now today we're looking at Hedera or HBAR as requested down in the comments. And to be honest with you, I don't have too much to say about the US dollar charts. There's a few points that we're going to go over, but the main thing I'm going to be talking about on the US dollar chart anyway is the comparison with Cardano, and especially what we saw this first bull run that Hedera went through looks very similar to the first bull run Cardano went through. They painted a very similar picture, and we're going to get into that later. But first I want to basically very quickly talk about what we've seen over the last halving. So last halving, Hedera basically traded sideways, put in a double top, trended up slowly afterwards after the halving, had a dip down below, revisited this support that it had previously put in, and then rallied up once the bull run arrived. So we see it set a high, it set a low, it set a range basically, and it traded within that. So far, if we're going to assume this is kind of like a lot of people are talking about, the left translated cycle, if we're assuming this is our bull run, we've kind of had a similar thing where we've set in a high, we've set in a low, we've revisited the low, came back to the high, bit of a rejection, and then pushed through it. But I personally don't think this is what's happening. I think what's kind of more the case is that if anything, we should move this guy up here, and this is going to be where we probably get our double top, and we should move this guy down here. And I think this is probably going to be our next range. And it does kind of play into it a little bit better. We can see this one came from a very strong move to the upside. And if we zoom in here, we've had a very strong move to the upside for Hedera. We've moved from a low of 4 cents to 12 cent high, basically. So a 3x. This will be much more than a 3x, but, you know, a 500x, so probably a 600 actually from low to bottom, so basically double. And then we can see we also set the range low pretty soon after that. And of course, that's what we've also done this cycle. We set the range low. So if I was a betting man, which I'm not, and again, I'm not recommending anyone trade the advice I give, but it looks like HBAR is going to trade sideways for a while. If it's playing out similarly like it did before, there's no guarantee that it has to though. Of course, it could just keep going straight up from here. And I think that also depends on what happens when it next revisits the bull market support band. I have a feeling we'll probably have a bit of a resistance here. If we move below the bull market support band and come back down to this support, I would basically assume a similar thing happening. And if we check how long we kind of spent in this range, from the first low to the last low, it was 43 weeks. If we take a look at kind of 43 weeks out from this first low, it would put us in early February next year, actually kind of 3rd of February next year, which again would kind of line up with a time where, in at least for my case, where I think we're in a right translated cycle, what we're getting now is happening later than when it did comparatively previous cycles. If that is the case, it does line up very well, because early 2025 would be when I would be pricing in a bull run like we've seen here. It would also be when rates would have been cut, or at least be being cut, and potentially monetary policy, stimulus, all those buzzwords coming from the United States Fed. But again, I could be wrong. That's just what I believe broadly, and also specifically with Hedera. Another point that I've mentioned at the start of the video is the comparison of Hedera with Cardano. Now, comparing the charts, the thing I want to talk about again on a broad scale is kind of how similarly they've played out. So Cardano caught the first wave of this bull run and put in a high here at the start of 2018. Basically just caught the tail ends of the 2017 bull run. Then trades downwards for a year, gets a mini bull run in 2019, continues to trade down up until 2020, and then we get our kind of 2021 bull run that begins after the halving, more or less around May time of 2020, up until the end of 2021. A year, give or take, a little more of bullish action. Now, if we go back to Hedera and take a look at what happened, we had this peak that we started from in late 2019. This is kind of the tail end of the 2019 mini bull run, the minor bull run, as I talk about. Kind of July time when it peaked for a lot of alts, but pushing it out to September, it is possible. Anyway, it definitely traded down during this time, and we got the correction that most other altcoins did up until 2020. We had a bit of a reversion. COVID happens, we get a sell-off, and then it's basically from that low, we move into the bull run, which is similar to what happened here. The keynotes being that Hedera, its launch price, was very similar to the highs that it put in later on for its kind of 2021 bull run. The exact same as Cardano. It doesn't go much higher than its kind of launch price that it hits. You see Hedera, its launch price, the highs don't go much higher. And we also get higher lows in the kind of next cycle after the bear run. So our bear run lows put us at higher lows, which is usually a bullish sign, to be fair. It shows stability at least, or that it's not depreciating majorly. And again, with Cardano, we got these higher lows. Now with Cardano, again, it was much higher lows in terms of percentage wise. I think we were somewhere around 1,000% higher than previous cycle low. Yep, 1,000%. And if we take a look at Hedera, I'm pretty sure it was like 265 basically from first cycle low to second cycle low. So definitely a bit more compressed. I would assume they would play out pretty similarly in terms of what's to come as well. And for Cardano, I don't see it going much higher than the already all-time highs. I can see a scenario where we kind of go to $4 perhaps, and that being our new cycle high, but I can't see it going any further. And if we say we take that as a good case scenario, that'll be a 700% move. If we go to Hedera, take current price, and move 700% up, again, we're going to go much higher. Excuse me here. We're going to be coming to around 90 cents more or less, with the previous all-time high being just below 60. Now there's a lot of stuff here that's open to criticism and tweaking because a lot of it is basically speculation, and I would invite you to do so. The reason I chose Cardano is because Cardano is a pretty big altcoin crypto, and it's probably not going to see kind of huge-ish gains. So it could be a good base case for an altcoin that's further down the risk curve, lower liquidity, so therefore the price will move either way in a much more explosive manner. To have an idea or an assumption of where Cardano might go, you could assume Hedera going in a similar way, but to maybe a greater extent. The same way you might say that about Ethereum for Cardano, for example. You would say Ethereum is much higher liquidity, much higher market cap. Cardano is most likely going to outperform Ethereum during the good times because it will move up in a more volatile way. However, during the bad times, it will move down in a much more volatile, stronger way. Same with Hedera to Cardano. You can compare it to whatever altcoin you want. I think the moves look pretty similar. Avalanche would probably be another good one to compare it to. They probably look like similar charts, and I think they launched at more or less the same time. Anyway, I'm waffling. If we swap over now and take a look at the Hedera BTC chart, we can see a bit more kind of a defined range here going on. And this, depending on how you want to look at it, is usually a good or a bad thing with an altcoin. When we set this high and this low, and we operate within it, we can often kind of predict to some degree how the altcoin is going to perform. Now we have a cycle's worth of data, which is always good. However, they do vary a bit. And again, this would tie in more to my right translation theory, where we came down to these lows much earlier last cycle, before the halving, and now we're only arriving at them now at the halving. We've had a bounce, and you could argue we haven't even arrived at them. We've just wicked into them. We haven't actually closed below them like we did before. Although that's much of a muchness, you could argue it's basically the same thing. And you can see we also come back down to it a second time months later on. You could argue that we haven't been here yet. You could argue that we have, but what happened last cycle is we came down to it twice. So either way, we're probably going to come back here again to some degree. And if you want to check how long it was before we came back down to this low, it was 49 weeks. Again, measuring out from this low, 49 weeks, it puts you at the kind of Q1 of next year. Again, the kind of time frame when, in my opinion, a bull run is probably going to take place. Now, you can adjust that by a few weeks backwards, a few weeks forwards. Again, I think it's foolish to assume that things are going to play out exactly the same, to the same amount of time, same amount of days. Obviously, it's not going to be 43 weeks of a difference again, but whether it's 52 or it's 45 weeks, it probably doesn't hurt to at least consider this a possibility. And then again, we will most likely see a move to the upside. And again, if this does tie in with the bull run, you're going to be outperforming Bitcoin to about 900% of a degree. And if Bitcoin sort of 2x's, potentially even 3x's over the bull run, you're looking at a very, very, very nice return from Hedera, But again, that is assuming that it's going to return to these all-time highs. A lot of altcoins don't continue to climb higher on their Bitcoin pairs. Even though they do well on the USD pairs, over the long run, they bleed against Bitcoin. And that's just because while they have a great bull run and they outperform BTC in the bull run to a huge degree, they lose all that value and more over the 3 years where the crypto space isn't rallying. And that is sadly the case for a lot of these coins. And I'm not saying Hedera is one of those coins, I'm saying it could be one of those coins. You can see if we kind of zoom in here as well, we've got a lot of downward pressure. We've been kind of moving lower and lower in the short term, and then also the long term we've had these big strong pressures. We have a support coming up, but we've already broken below it, so it kind of doesn't really mean anything, but it does show a bit of a wedge. But again, we are most likely to break down to the downside because we've already removed this support before. However, we haven't really gotten past this resistance in any meaningful way before. So I would assume another move down to the downside. Again, this could play out over a long time. If it wants to ride this resistance all the way down, it would put us in kind of December time, a little bit afterwards for reaching these lows. So again, kind of tying in with the right translated cycle, 6 months at least from now, 7 months, when we put in these lows again. But none of this stuff does have to play out. It's all just a possibility. Once we hit this low though, you can expect pretty drastic moves to the upside, assuming that monetary policy and the general global economic state, or at least in America and Europe, the money printers are turned on. And we can ride along another few years in the Ponzi scheme that we call the global financial system. But until then, I'm going to keep making videos, and hopefully until then, you're going to keep liking them. So thank you so much for watching. If you did like the video, please leave a like. If you didn't, leave a dislike. That's totally fine too. Comment down below where you think Hedera is going and if you're holding it this bull run. Either way, have a good one. Take care and peace.